In case you haven't met me here, I'm Marcus Longo, and I'm a research scientist at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. And there is something. Okay. Get in there. Okay, got it. Okay, so. Yeah, there you go. Okay, thank you. All right, so what I'm going to do now is just do a very quick recap of the main goals of PANGEA and the main goals of a terrestrial ecology project, Banasa, and then we are going to break out into some group discussions. I think it will take about 55 minutes, and then we give 15 minutes more or less for the note takers to gather thoughts and organize some very brief reports back, and then we'll go for a coffee break, and then back from the coffee break we'll have the note takers giving a brief report. So let's see. Oh, okay. So you can move to the next one. Yeah. Next. Or should I? Okay. Okay. Yeah. All right. Thank you. So now, as we're getting towards the end of the workshop, I think it's important for us to start thinking about a more direct definition of what PANGEA is going to be. We know already that PANGEA is going to be a multi-scale campaign covering measurements from in situ to spaceborne, going through tower measurements, airborne measurements as well, and with the goal of understanding the how tropical forests across different continents are going to respond to global change and how these responses may vary across the different continents. But that's a super overarching question, and we may need to start thinking about how we are going to hone in. And with this, it will come like with several other implications that I'm going to go very briefly through the next slides. Let me see if I can advance here. Okay, so where we are at right now, in case you don't remember, we are in Washington, DC at the community workshop. So, and next week there will be a EGU town hall and followed by additional special sessions and regional consultations. And by September, we hope to have a full draft of the white paper. So it gives times for the community to give feedback to the first draft, and then we can finalize, submit to NASA, and NASA will think that the project is amazing and it's going to fund us. So that's the goal. So yeah, next. Oh, sorry. Been trying to solve here. So just as a reminder of what the terrestrial ecology field campaign is supposed to be, so we do need to answer big science questions that are relevant at biome scale or multiple biomes. And we also need to have, oh, okay. We need, we also need to enable more effective interpretation of the measurements and analysis that we're going to collect. So it's like not supposed to collect a lot of data and stuff like that. we also have to have a strong component on analysis. We also want to foster collaborations and interactions and build new relationships within the community. And that's something that is already happening both through the working groups and with all the discussions that we are having here. But of course, this is like just the beginning. We want to expand it even further and provide valuable opportunities for training and educating the next generation of scientists. We heard about those how important the long-lasting legacies of those campaigns are from previous campaigns, and we want to replicate, of course, this in Pangea. So should I move or? Okay, thank you. And we've been thinking big over all the working groups and during these discussions. That's part of the process. We want to expand the ideas, make sure that we capture as much as we can with these ideas. But at some point, which is probably approaching this point, we reach this kind of crest here, and we will have to start thinking about what can actually be done through these campaigns. And with this idea of like thinking big and then thinking what NASA can fund, there will be several things that are going to happen. So if you can move to the next slide, please. Yeah. So we've been gathering lots of information of also synergistic activities, partners and institutions that want to bring together here, complementary data sets that are already there that we can build from. So we're not starting from ground zero here. Also, lots of discussions have led to ideas for manuscripts that are going to happen, even with the scoping of Pangea. Also, like the idea of maybe like having some kind of papers that would highlight the needs for Pangea, which could be a very important step of the scoping project. And also like start thinking how can we make sure that Pangea will follow the best practices, what we learned from previous campaigns, what worked, what could have improved in previous campaigns, and that's no opportunity for us to do. Also, like we heard about like so many aspects. These ecosystems are extremely complex. We are not going to be able to measure everything. We're not going to measure every aspect of forest ecosystems, but that doesn't mean that those things shouldn't happen. They should happen, and maybe like they can be part of like an expanded version of Pangea through additional funding. And also like identify within Pangea itself, like we can't fund every possible aspect of the campaign. How can we actually seek additional funding to complement the activities that are key for the success of Pangea? And I guess maybe like before we break out to the groups, if you next, please. Yeah, so as I said, like this is not the first time that this happens. We had heard several times from the previous terrestrial ecology field campaigns from LBA and above. So, and many of those things actually happen in this campaign. So maybe like I can pass to whoever would like to talk a little bit from LBA and from above, like just to do like a very 1 minute summary or 1.5 minutes, maybe, just to be nice. Summary of like how this worked in the LBA and above in terms of funding opportunities and best practices and spin-off proposals from LBA and above. I'm looking at some.
Okay, I will make an LBA comment. This is a very United States-centric cultural reference. There was a film called Field of Dreams, and a guy builds a baseball field in the middle of a cornfield. And the rest of the story is very complicated, but the punchline of the story was, if you build it, they will come. And he builds this baseball field, and this game appears in the middle of the cornfield. And the point is that if we build it, others will pile on. If we can convince NASA to give a stamp of approval to Pangea, I guarantee that others will join in the party and want to join in the party. And they're already talking about wanting to join in the party. But you need a big impetus to like get over the hill. And we're here to push this thing forward. If you build it, they will come. That's my punchline.
All right, thank you. Anyone from above would like to give like a quick I was already staring to you, Peter.
I'm not sure that I can be nearly as pithy and witty as my colleague Michael. Getting more into kind of the nuts and bolts of where these additional funding opportunities might come from. NASA didn't have nearly as much money for above as we did for LBA Eco, and we made some very strategic connections to U.S. and Canadian large programs. Polar Knowledge Canada, in the case of Canada, DOE Next Generation Ecosystem Experiment, NG Arctic, where we got very close with those organizations, sort of administratively signed MOUs, and that definitely expanded the scope of what we could take on. And it was, like Michael said, NASA started to, to do that, and people wanted to get involved. I think another one of the things that was really important for above is that from the very beginning, we repeated over and over again, we're the ones that are new coming into where you're working. So we made connections with the land management agencies in Alaska, with Canadian Forest Service, with Government of Northwest Territories, saying over and over again, okay, we have these airplanes and these satellites and stuff, but you're the one, we're working where you live, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that, and we opened the door for voluntary association with above. And so we had a lot of Canadian researchers, many of whom were funded by NGOs and foundations and things like that, that voluntarily associated themselves with above. So those are some of the mechanisms of having a little bit of humility, which is important, and an open door.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the input, both of you, Peter and Michael. And I think now what we're going to do is to break out to the groups. So this is how we are going to do. Like, we have 4 different groups, and it's a bit open-ended, but if you would like to take some pictures here of the main topics that we want to cover in each of the groups. So the first one is going to focus on identifying additional funding opportunities for PANGEA. So like those associated projects that could be directly interacting with PANGEA. And that group is going to be facilitated by Stella, and with Paul helping to take notes. And it's going to be meeting here. This group is going to be meeting here. So the second one is going to be like how we can gather and share information, and how to organize this information. And this group is going to meet in the main lobby. Robinson is going to be facilitating, and we do need a note taker, so please volunteer yourself if you feel like doing. In the downstairs lobby, we are going to talk about PANGEA as an opportunity to model and implement best practices from the onset. And this group is going to, I'm going to be facilitating, and we do have a note taker for that one. Victor kindly was volunteered to take the notes. And finally, downstairs in the third rock room, we're going to talk about the spin-off proposals and activities, and Evan Gora is going to be in that room, and Nadia is also going to be there helping. And that the difference, like between the first and the fourth, is more like the first one is if PANGEA is funded, how we can complement funding, and the fourth one is more like what can we do in case PANGEA is not selected, but also like parts of PANGEA, parts of science that is related to the tropical biomes that is not directly linked to PANGEA, but that could become like a part of this broader team, like, or associated project. So we also have online people. So what we are going to do is to do the following. We are going to break out for the online, and I will help ask you kindly to organize yourselves between facilitator and note taker at the beginning. One of the groups is going to focus on what we on the breakout 1 and 4, so the funding opportunities and the spin-off proposals, and the other group will be talking about the gathering and sharing information and the opportunity to implement and model best practices. Is that all right? So right now, what time is it? 9. So 40 minutes to discuss. 5 minutes to collect the thoughts. Yeah. So we are reporting before the coffee break then. Okay. Yeah. All right. So
Can you hear me? Yeah. Convene and discuss until 9:50, 9:55. We'll meet back here at 10 a.m. to hear the reporting back from each group.
sounds good.
Thanks,
See you in a
Marcos.
bit.
another difficulty that has been discussed also in the previous days has been access to data, and not just access to data, but also capacity to use that data. Then we kind of went to what then can we discuss and see, identify as successful aspects to work on. Is training was one of the first things that were discussed. Training of our colleagues to work in symmetrical way. Colleagues, the students, and workshops are one way to help us to get together, have time together, and start to plan on how do we collaborate, we co-develop, co-create that. And also the PANGEA should make specific efforts on facilitating the local colleagues, meaning colleagues in the institutions in the area like the Amazon and institutions in the area of Africa, be the lead of the structure of the efforts of research, the lead authors, to co-design, co-organize the way how we access to data, manage data, and be in the leadership of the projects. In terms of data access, there's been a lot of good examples how cloud computing is facilitating that and expand and strengthen that. We also said that PANGEA should leverage and use existing collaborations. Many of our institutions, universities have already existing collaborators, structures of collaboration, and we should it should facilitate and leverage that infrastructure that's already in place, which could facilitate. We just add on things that we need to do and things that are already taking place. We discussed about possibilities of developing systems of mentorship that will facilitate long-term collaborations between colleagues and facilitate that our colleagues in the South could continue work in training and facilitating research for their students as well. I think that's some of my notes. If anybody in the group want to add.
Any additions from group 3 members? Okay. Thank you. Paul, should we move on to you?
So our group, we first sort of affirmed the
Can you remind us which group you were?
we were group 1, yeah, and we are looking at additional sources of funding for PANGEA. So the group basically affirmed the real importance of this because of the constraint on the NASA funding, that it's essential for us to find other sources of funding, because there are going to be key people in many of the scientific activities who are not going to have access to that funding. And that should be the key priority for going for outside funds, is to fill in the gaps, right? i.e. to fund the people who cannot be funded through NASA. And in terms of identifying specific sources, a number were identified. In particular, given the colonial history of Africa, several European nations were mentioned in the context of funding for African nations. That includes France, Belgium, Germany, and potentially also the UK. It was also noted there may be other things through Australia and New Zealand. In terms of specific institutions mentioned, for example, in the case of France, it was IRD. In the case of Germany, it was IKI and GIZ. So that was just identified, and it was recognized that those were likely to many of that might be in the form of scholarships and things for students to pursue PhDs and higher degrees And many of those actually, at least through the European Union, have quite a bit of flexibility as to where the individual can go. Okay. In terms of other institutions identified, there was sort of a set of ones in the US, specifically USAID, through things like its Silver Carbon program and the Severe program. It was also thought that there would probably be things through NSF. So some people in the group had experience through programs like the PAIA program, which was essentially an international research training grant that NSF runs, and things like that. Let's see. Another one in the case of the I sort of linked to that was the philanthropy institutions. Example was raised was the Bezos Fund, and whether the Bezos Fund might be interested in funding things linked to Pangea, and that we should reach out to them. And then another sort of unusual one in the case of Southeast Asia is the royal families in Southeast Asia, right? So in places like Bhutan, Thailand, and Brunei, right? Those royal families often have resources either directly or indirectly that could provide things to complement what NASA cannot provide. And then, so we then had a discussion about sort of identifying how to make a spreadsheet of the institutions. And the general suggestion was to recognize that there are sort of effectively different categories. So there's the international category of institutions. There's sort of a regional and national category, and then local funding sources as well. And just some examples of other institutions I haven't mentioned yet. For example, in that regional national capacity, for example, the African Union. But then at the international level, there are organizations like IUCN and ITO and CAFI, which also could provide funds potentially to complement what the NASA cannot provide. Yeah, and I think that's. Anyone else in the group want to say anything else?
Yeah.
Just to add that the fundraising around Pangea will take work from everybody who's involved and in this room. So not just the people who met in group one. So if people have ideas for sources for supplementary funding, connections to those, that they should come to the Pangea leadership team now, because now is the time to be searching for that supplementary support.
Yeah, thanks
Great.
for that. Yeah, and we really focused on the idea of creating a spreadsheet now, getting the institutions, organized and into that, identifying contacts, identifying any history of previous people getting funding through those institutions that would be really helpful. But there was an emphasis on doing that early and not waiting to kind of see what happens with the NASA side of things. And indeed, one important point that was raised is actually if that spreadsheet can be made and started to be acted upon, it can effectively act as leverage on NASA itself, which can be helpful.
Yeah, really great point. Any other comments from group members? Okay. Moving on.
All right, I'm going to be reporting from group number 4. So we were charged with thinking about essentially spin-off proposals or activities, essentially funding these types of activities we're discussing if Pangea is not selected. And not just only the funding mechanism, but how to keep the group sort of continuity to continue to pursue things like this. We had a really great discussion, lots of ideas. I'm going to try to summarize this into just sort of 5 major bullet points, but there was a lot discussed. So if people need to add things, we can. We started chatting a bit about funding the airborne campaigns, things like NASA planes, which is particularly challenging because they're very expensive. So sort of standard 6-week mission is somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million to pay for that. single one-time collection in a place. So that is quite expensive. There is precedent for that actually being funded through private funding organizations. So something like Bezos or Schmidt or something like that that was described, funding like that can be, there can be an agreement with NASA to basically fund the use of NASA planes through things like that. It's possible an individual flight can be funded through a ROSES call, so the standard NASA pathway, although that gets harder as you get further from the United States because the plane needs to get to the location. So ROSES is conceivable, but that's challenging. Sort of a mid-level campaign is funded through something called Earth Venture Suborbital. So that we're supposed to hear about those like this week or something like that. And there will be another call from that in about 5 years. So those are the types of things that can fund but the current version anywhere from $7 to $15 million for those types of airborne campaigns. So they can be pretty substantial. And then there are things like AFRISAR. So those can fund NASA flights. Something that was noted also, there are for some types of sensors, cheaper ways to go through private contractors at this point. So somewhere, depending on your location, it varies. You can be as low as $100 a hectare or $1,000 a hectare. You can have someone come fly a small footprint LiDAR at your location through some of these private. What was that? Or $2 a hectare. Sorry. Yeah, you can get it very cheap apparently. So those are sort of the airborne components. We also talked a bunch about building these relationships with existing major funding bodies and pursuing funding through them, NSF, IKI, IRD, things that Paul just described. So I won't repeat all of those. We had a substantial component of our conversation talking about some of these foundations. There's a lot of momentum right now with foundations trying to fund things related in particular to carbon cycling or conserving biodiversity that has a lot of overlap with what we're talking about with PANGEA. A note there that I'll just plug, Elsa was in our conversation. She mentioned that if people have some existing and notable relationships with any of these organizations, the leadership team would really appreciate you reaching out for conversations about how they might be able to interact with the PANGEA program. I think things like having letters of support from those types of organizations increase the likelihood that PANGEA is funded. So if someone knows someone who would write a letter of support about Bezos or whatever, like that's the type of thing that helps make PANGEA happen. We also discussed broadening our thinking beyond just like forests and plants, which has been a lot of what the conversation has been related to, but animals are very popular for conservation. Groups like FAO fund agricultural research. There's a lot of interest in disease ecology right now. And a lot of things we're talking about have downstream effects, implications for disease ecology. A lot of these different organizations, if we broaden our thinking, would open a lot more doors to fill gaps if PANGEA is not selected. We had some specific conversation about stipends, training, and capacity building. Now that fits within a lot of these other funding groups, but there are groups like JRS Biodiversity Foundation, the U.S. State Department, USAID. There are programs like NSF PIRE that was already mentioned. There are some of these things that exist for sustainable capacity building. So that's something that could also be pursued. And I'll wrap up. We talked some about communication. I think this would still be valuable to get feedback from the community about. I think we might have had a narrower set of perspectives than are represented in the whole group, but there were discussions about Slack or LinkedIn. We realized the reality is like a lot of us communicate on WhatsApp. So a giant, enormous WhatsApp group might not be the easiest to use, but it's still a common tool. We discussed 2 additional things, potentially having some type of newsletter so that people who aren't going to be plugged into WhatsApp or Slack have a mechanism to receive information about, hey, this initiative is starting through the people who have been involved in PANGEA. You can sign up for it. And then we discussed having a directory, and that's probably something that would have to be ground up, but maybe something we can circulate at the end of this meeting where people can fill out their information, their expertise, where they work, so that if people want to build connections, and maintain these connections, and not just north to south, which is how things often flow, but south to south, those could be pursued in the future with a directory. I think that's our group, but if other people have things to add, please.
Any other contributions from folks in that group? Thanks, Evan. Okay. Yeah, one. Okay.
About funding. So I think that what you have to do is to make one cartography of donors, because you know that in the Africa, donors who are coming there, they have the domain of interest. So maybe for each donor, we have to know what are the domain of interest. For example, in South Africa, you can see that Germany cooperation, they are involved only in the capacity building and biodiversity. They fund this activity. USAID, they are in forest monitoring, environment, and health. European Union, they have say the domain of interest. So maybe you have to do one cartography, precise cartography of each donor. So it will be easy to convince them to add money to fund this PANGEA project. Merci. Thank you.
De rien, merci à vous. It would be a good idea to do that, I think, based on regional opportunities. So not just going to these agencies, but specifically in the white paper, maybe focusing on which agencies would support what, where. Yeah, great. Okay, let's move to the last.
All right, so I am Liz Hoy and from NASA Goddard. I work on above and I am the note taker for group 2, but if any of you want to comment at the end, please feel free. So our question was how to integrate data from different groups. That's really where we started our conversation. And the important considerations we really came up with, we distill it down. We were looking at, we decided that consistent and accessible data across the tropics was our ultimate goal. And to get there, we were thinking about issues such as data sovereignty. So it's important to look ahead to think about that. Sometimes it's codified into law that data is kept where it's collected. There are rights of communities who collect data. And then, of course, NASA has this NASA open data. So thinking a little bit about that is going to be important. And we also talked about ensuring the accuracy of collected data, understanding who owns data, if it's a partner organization, making sure that their data is accurate. And then another main issue we brought up was accessibility. So we want to think about where is the data located and access based on user needs. So is this user a scientist or a local community member? How are they going to access these different data sets? Access to the internet will be important as a consideration because with many of the cloud-based data solutions, if people don't have access to the internet, they might not be able to get access to this data. So we thought about use cases based on these cloud-based strategies where there could be issues if people can't access the internet to access the data. And would there be some facilitation to help people in those situations? We also talked about within the framework of PANGEA, perhaps each country's government could have some responsibility for maintaining and allowing access to data within their country. We talked about how political issues could affect access and the importance of ensuring partner institutions allow access to different groups. We talked about access to the cloud, or what are some other solutions that could work if cloud-based access is difficult, and who might fund that and who might manage that. NASA has the open data policy, and there could be potential issues with, oh my, somebody's adding things to this sheet and it's like changing where I am. There we go. Okay.
Thank you for adding notes, but maybe pause for just a minute.
Pause so I can finish.
Talking about real time.
Yeah. Sorry. Okay, let's see, where was I? Okay, with open data, needing to think about if there are other groups partnering with PANGEA and how would that data be shared. Student authorship could be an issue, ensuring that students are properly credited for their data sets. There could be other exceptions or special cases, and potential for creating protocols for data access for closed data where you have to request access for some reason. We also talked about different types of data. So there's archive data that's been completed by a project and sent off to, for example, a NASA Archive Center. Oh, but there's also intermediate project data that would need to be shared across team members within PANGEA. And how is that data going to be shared? Is there a cloud-based solution for that? Then we even talked about physical sample data and how do we share that or process that or take it? Does it need to go out of country to be processed? Can it stay in country and have it be done there? We talked about, let's see, evaluating where the data will be kept, aiming for redundancy. So thinking about if we have data stored on a server in country, is it also stored, is it mirrored at a NASA deck? Thinking about how we can have some redundancy in that system. And then we talked a little bit about past campaign experiences. We shared a little bit about what Above has done in some of these situations. And then we had representatives from Bioscapes that shared a little bit about some tools and technologies that they've developed to share some of their data sets. And then we heard a little bit about LBA and how for LBA, there was a team at Goddard and a team in country in LBA that allowed data to be mirrored in both locations, and that funding was often not distributed to NASA-funded PIs until their data was put into that archive system. So it's really important to think about how to facilitate getting our scientists to all put their data in these archive centers. So that's most of what we talked about, and I think it's an important challenge. I'm glad you had a breakout group for it.
Yeah, well, thanks for reporting back. Thanks for all the feedback. Okay, so now people can go back to putting notes in the document. We had 2 online breakout groups, and we also have a hand up in Zoom. So I'm going to first go to Libyen. Do you have a comment still, Libyen?
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Elsa. I was reporting for group 2 online. I don't know if it overlaps with the other people that are supposed to report.
Yeah, that's fine. Go ahead and report back what your group discussed.
Yeah.
And maybe introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, I'm Lebien Fetes-Sagar. I'm a postdoctoral scholar at UCLA, working on applying remote sensing to have a better understanding of carbon cycle and disturbance processes. So my group had 2 main questions to talk about. Like the first was how to build symmetrical collaboration. And I will skip what has already been said from the other reporters. So on the first point, how to build symmetrical collaboration, the main ideas we suggested was to making sure that the engagement from researchers in the North also meets the expectations from researchers in the South. And we also highlighted the fact that some fundings, for example, might not cover the wages. And being aware of the realities of working in the South, sometimes the salary of the researchers is not like enough. And this could be like an additional way of motivating them to engage. That was one point. And also, we talk about the idea of thinking of funding to support students or postdocs to come to the US for trainings. And also we thought of organizing virtual workshops where both researchers from the South can like train some researchers or students from the North, and vice versa. And the second question was how to ensure a long-lasting legacy of PANGEA. We used the example of LBA, and we understand that one key factor that helped LBA to have this long-lasting legacy was the creation of MapBarmas. And MapBarmas being a Brazilian institution means that research locally, PANGEA should reach out to the government and encourage them to think of creating a international research institution, so that it's going to ensure job opportunities for people who will be trained, because most of the time they get here, they are trained, but there is no local system that will enable them to go back and make their skills usable for their communities. And also we could think of organizing training sessions on how to write proposals and have access to grants for people in the South, because that is another big challenge. So that is it. Thank you.
Thanks, Libyan. Our second presenter from Zoom will be Jeremy Lichstein. Jeremy, are you there?
Hey, yes, I am here. So I'm Jeremy Lichstein. I'm a professor at the University of Florida, and we discussed funding issues. So we identified a few potential agencies in different countries that might be partners. I think those are captured on the Jamboard. But I think mostly we talked about kind of more higher level issues. So, what is the intellectual scope of PANGEA? And that has implications for, how much of the project NASA would fund versus other agencies, other partners. So for example, is Pangea just about wet forests, or does it also include dry forests? There are many different types of agriculture. So which ones will be studied? There are many types of social ecological questions to ask in the context of social ecological systems, feedbacks between humans and ecosystems. It's easy to imagine, that you could have a very large project just focused on that. So these are some of the questions that have arisen from the last few days of the workshop, but then there are other questions that haven't even been addressed. So for example, different types of biosphere atmosphere feedbacks. For example, how biogenic compounds besides CO2 and methane affect atmospheric chemistry. So the intellectual scope already seems potentially quite broad, but it could be even broader. And so I guess I'm sure that the leadership team is keenly aware of this, but we kind of talked about a little, should the white paper or should the intellectual scope of Pangea be very broad, in which case that would just mean a smaller portion of it would actually be funded by NASA, and the role of other agencies, partners, etc., might need to be more explicit in the white paper, as opposed to defining the scope of Pangea to be more narrow. So it could just focus on intact forests, or it could just focus on social ecological systems, and then hope that other partners, agencies kind of emerge, and the intellectual scope might be broadened in a more haphazard kind of bottom up organic way. So yeah, I guess one activity that we briefly discussed that might naturally be funded by other US agencies would be land modeling. So NOAA, DOE, and CAR, there are obvious partners there who could fund kind of process-based land modeling activities. That's one example of where we might keep the scope broad, but identify those partners and maybe bring them into the white paper process.
Great.
And if anyone else from my group wants to chime in, please go ahead.
Thanks. All right. Thank you very much, Jeremy and Libyan, for sharing the Zoom input as well. So we're going to move into coffee break and then we'll wrap up. We've gotten a lot of really useful input here, and I actually just created a document so that we can start to put those contacts for folks at other agencies, donor organizations. We already have started quite a lot of those conversations. There's a lot of information that is really, I said this to the group I was in, it's not concrete enough to share publicly, right? But at this stage, there's a lot of conversations that are starting to happen that I think we could find ways to get potentially letters of support or some level of commitment to put into the white paper that says, if NASA funds this, we'd be willing to get on board in this way. So we are having those conversations, but contacts from you all, I mean, this is a really, really amazing community of folks in this room and online and who have been participating over the last 2 days. So please, wherever you're comfortable, share those contacts with us. You can email me directly to do that. And, it also helps for people to hear from many people about Pangea. So championing Pangea in circles you feel appropriate is also really useful. We've had some of those folks in agencies say, oh, I heard about Pangea from 5 different people now, so tell me more. Sometimes it takes that repeat information to encourage folks to sit down and listen. So share contacts. We'll come back to communication a little bit in the next session as we think about wrapping up. But I really appreciate all the input because we really truly do want to make the most out of this year. Whereas we're already, a lot of people are volunteering a ton of time and energy and effort. So we want to make sure that's captured and shared with the community. Doesn't just get buried. A couple housekeeping things before we move into the coffee break. We have the posters with sticky notes from the user session at the end of yesterday. So please, they're up around the room. Please take a look. If you want to add anything, I think that's allowed. Yep. So there'll be sticky notes and Sharpies around as well. And then there's also going to be a tour of the building if you're interested after lunch at about 12:30. Emily Johnson has organized somebody who will come and provide folks with a tour of the building if you're interested in learning more. I think that's it for now. So enjoy coffee and we'll meet back here at 11 a.m.
No, it's, yeah. Real time. Oh, wow.
Somebody put like so much in.
Yeah, it's chaos.
It's chaos.
Yes, that's the scary.
Thank you so much, Elsa. I have two wishful thinkings and a commitment. So wishful thinking number one, which is kind of a contradiction to what we've been discussing over the past couple of days, is that, you know, we are in an era of data, and there is so much data out there, as I understand. And I believe the most challenging exercise for all of us is often to step back and think, right? And think about what data means, but also think out of the scope of the data. And I say that because otherwise we get drowned into data and we get data feeding data. And I believe there is a lot of politics behind it. There's a lot of ideology, and it's good to think about that. And it's also good to think about it as we are now, you know, reaching the peak of the divergent part. And as we are starting to converge, it's good to, you know, not, when it comes to feasibility, it's good not to just to focus on the tangible criteria, but to also reflect on the kind of ideology that we are promoting through this kind of effort. The second wishful thinking is that, and it relates to the first, is that one important ideology that we are promoting now is collaborative science. It's important. And I wonder if we can think in terms of how collaborative science can support collaborative diplomacy. You know, we've had a few events recently, a few efforts to connect the three basins. We had the three basin summit in Brazzaville. We had Lula 2 years ago coming up with this OPEC for the three rainforest ecosystems. And it's probably the moment for us to support that wish and make it be, you know, grow organically. And it's about seeing if NASA, again, wishful thinking, can support South-South driven global governance. It's about, you know, supporting efforts that would make countries like the US lose a little bit of their power and, you know, shift it down to the South. So that was wishful thinking too. And now the commitment is that, you know, as WRI, we are very supportive of this effort. We took part to all stages of the process so far, And I do believe that in the months to come, you know, it's not just about supporting the design of PANGEA, but really supporting the design of this process. To us, the process matters as much as the result in this case. And I see this space as a sort of community of practice that we are creating. And again, trying already to connect the three basins, but also trying to connect, you know, hard science, those who speak hyperspectral language, with people like myself who speak communities, indigenous and local communities. So those are, the commitment is really just that WRI will remain engaged in this effort. And I really hope we, you know, we can bring a little bit to the table and yeah, and get something great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The next person I would like to ask is Lola.
Hi, Elsa. Thanks. I would like to start by first congratulating you, Elsa, because the work that you've done on PANGEA for the past few months has just been incredible. She's been working really hard on this, and I'm, you know, this workshop was really well organized. I think every one of us have gotten so much out of this, and so many connections have been made, people that you're used to seeing on that maybe we haven't seen, or you know the name and then you actually meet them in person. It's, you know, always great to see that. What are the big questions that we're supposed to answer? Oh, I'm very positive about PANGEA. I think the amount of engagement that you see just thinking about what we had 400 people participate, that just shows you how much this campaign is really needed, I think. Yes, and you know, when I was hearing those numbers, I was like, wow, 400 people. And sometimes we hear, well, LBA already happened. Why do we need another tropical campaign? Where clearly you have a lot of people who are engaged. There's a lot of questions. We came up with more projects than we'll ever be able to tackle. So I think, you know, just thinking about that, like there's a clear need for this type of work. And generally speaking, for the process of it, I think, I mean, I think that the team has done a really great job. It's really engaging. There are people from all of the countries here that we've been thinking about working in, and you know, hopefully that will lead to not just this project, but many others. I think a lot of what has been done here is actually much bigger than just PANGEA, and so yeah, I'm very hopeful.
I'm now going to ask Woody to share a few thoughts.
Thanks, Lola. So I think Ryan's point is well taken about PANGEA's challenges with regard to arid, domestic versus international. But I want to talk about three, actually maybe four superpowers that I think PANGEA has relative to other projects, activities, including arid, that could be discriminators and help make its selection more likely. One, and these are all sort of suggestions of things to do. First, I think in terms of how we talk about PANGEA, we need to stop fighting with one of our arms behind our back. And by that I mean is we need to double down on the global, hey, listen, guys, I'm biased. Okay. So I run a biodiversity program, so I'm going to push this hard. But I do think when we're talking PANGEA, we need to not only talk about the classic NASA sort of climate change and biogeochemical cycle, and where's the carbon type stuff. We also need to double down on the other existential global crisis, and that is biodiversity loss. As we talk about that, so we've got a twofer here. We know these things are intimately connected. Love your presentation at the outset, Elsa. When you talked about, gee, you know, a lot of forests act heterogeneously in response to changing climate. That heterogeneity, folks, that's the biodiversity signal. That's what that is. That's what's driving that heterogeneity. So if we want to understand that and why some places are different, even in the same basin or the same area, the biodiversity is going to be the answer to that. So couple these things. They're coupled naturally. You should couple and sell this. Not only you'll need to do it for the science to understand it, but you also got this other sort of global existential crisis going on that I think is important. And I would twin this thing and make it both, not just one or biodiversity in the service of the other, because you can't describe it. Second superpower, I think this has, is sort of the flip side of Ryan's point about, well, the domestic stuff is easier. NASA is and that second superpower is the very international nature of this. NASA tends to not like to undo international arrangements, particularly NASA international arrangements, but even arrangement, I think, of folks proposing to NASA in a scoping study. So what that means is PANGEA needs to double down on its international components. We need to get the other folks from the other regions into the driver's seat, fully in the driver's seat, controlling this process. And we need to get some early commitments, as you were just talking about, Elsa, early commitments from other governments, be they in the Pantropics or in Europe, that is interested in working with us on the Pantropics. So we get commitments. If NASA goes ahead with the scoping study, we will do 1, 2, 3, 4. You need to have the mother spreadsheet that has all this stuff on there and put that in your white paper, and it shows how far we've gotten already in this domain. If you can show that, it adds power to your white paper, but it also would mean, oh gosh, if we don't select PANGEA, we're going to look bad maybe with colleagues in Europe, with colleagues in Central Africa, colleagues in Latin America, elsewhere. So there is sort of a way you can play that to your advantage, even though it might appear to initially be a weakness. The third or fourth, whatever third superpower is the applied element. So we talked about users here. Traditionally, airborne campaigns have been research only because they're limited in space and in time. It's limited geography, and it's only, we maybe fly 1 or 2 years, even above 3 years of flights-ish. And so that generally means, well, that's not really enough for applications. But with Bioscape and now going forward, we're trying to toy with how we can sort of make applications work out of airborne data sets. It's challenging, but what it means is doubling down again on those connections to the end users, to the other countries, and getting those folks in those countries working on things like water, like fire, like invasive species, like protected area management, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, engaged in what the data you might take and how they can use it to demonstrate capabilities that they can then maybe follow on later, but to get them not only at the research level, but also at the applied level in governments, that we need these data for conservation. We need these data to manage fire. We need these data for water management, soils, et cetera. Again, those applied users we're serious about Earth Science to Action at NASA headquarters. We don't really know how to do it, and we're making it up as we go along. So if you can play that ES to A card, it will work in your favor. And whoever does it better is going to get more credit. I think the applied folks will have a bigger say probably in this than they've ever had in previous scoping studies. The final thing, the fourth superpower, is just, as has already been mentioned, enthusiasm in the room, the people online, just that there is some passion for this. Continue to build that. Again, that's meetings, that's getting together, that's just banging the drum constantly about PANGEA and how important it is. So those are my thoughts.
Thanks. The next person I want to go to is Ashutosh. Ashutosh, are you online?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. I'm sorry I'm remote today. I was there in the room for the first 2 days, and I was just blown away. I could not agree with Lola more. This was a great meeting, a lot of positive energy. This has been fantastic. It is not an easy task to get together at this meeting, this size, this magnitude, with so much participation. It's phenomenal. So thank you for inviting us to be part of this. I really, I mean, Terrell stole my words. The global engagement with the global South is absolutely critical, and it's very evident in this meeting. You could have had this meeting in LA or someplace that was a small meeting with few people dialed in, and but that's not what you did. And so this is important, that as Woody was saying, the user-centric perspective is very, very important. And that I think is your fifth superpower, connecting with other entities that are doing similar work, and you've already started doing that. At Servier, you have many well-wishers around the world, Servier being one small one. I'll do my best to connect you with all the folks that I know. The positive energy that I walked away last 2 days was very infectious, and honestly, I'm scared. This is a massive task, and I hope you get butterflies, because if not, then there is something wrong. But this is exciting. This is something that will look back at and say that was a fantastic meeting that started it all. So thank you for including us in this part of this.
Thank you, Ashutosh. I now want to go to Liana.
I might stay seated because I'm reading notes, but hi, I'm Leanna Schwartz. I'm with the U.S. Forest Service International Programs. I don't know why I was selected to give my reflections, but thank you. Yeah, I just have a few comments and then questions that are my takeaways, sort of, that I'll be thinking about, and I'm sure all of us will be thinking about. First of all, this has been incredibly amazing how it's structured, and just seeing all these people and learning about all the science that's going on. It's incredibly inspiring, and I think it seems that it will continue to be inspiring. One thing that came up in our groups yesterday was this idea of a science fictional world post-Pangea, and I really liked that concept, and I would encourage everyone to keep thinking about that, and whether that would be different in the different tropical regions. What are these specific questions that need to be answered, and do those reflect the priorities of each of the countries where you'll be doing the campaign? And then how do we build on the existing partnerships and work that's ongoing? And I really liked Michael's reference of Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. But to me, what stuck out was how they come matters, right? It's not just will they come, but what they bring with them when they come, and how they sort of approach all of these questions and the work that results from the questions. So this means setting up partners like the U.S. Forest Service, USAID, all these agencies we talked about earlier, setting them up for success to really support the work that PANGEA is doing, and using the learnings from this scoping process and all of these amazing workshops that are going on across the globe, I guess. And being specific about what the role of NASA is versus what the potential roles of all these other donors and institutions that will support along the way. So yeah, again, thank you so much for all of the work and for this workshop, and best of luck as you move through the divergent to convergent time period. Thanks.
And last and most importantly, I selected a voice from the younger part of our community. And I'm gonna hope I don't mispronounce your name, Halini, from Manaus.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the young part. I appreciate that. So I'm really glad to be here and to be part of this discussion. As Elsa said, I'm from Manaus. I'm from one of the areas that most people here have talked about, and like there's so much science coming from. And I'm really glad to be part of this discussion, because I think this is a moment that we are here together because we are studying, or like we are from tropical regions. And I think for PANGEA, at least for me, what is it that actually unites us as tropical region? What is it that is so important in tropical regions that everyone is talking about? It is biodiversity, right? And we are also like facing so many changes right now in climate, as you've seen. Like we have the worst drought in the Amazon in 100 years, and we are seeing that this is changing, and biodiversity, it's like it is threatened, and it's something that is real. And I think it is a moment that is for us to talk about how can we actually help
those people that are living these regions to deal with all these changes that are happening. And to me, I see that PANGEA is this opportunity for us to provide data. I don't mean that we are going to answer all the questions, but we are going to provide at least data that other people can answer questions in the future, and that can really like bring us results that are going to change the way that we are dealing with the environment. We don't need to sometimes ask like really big questions. With PANGEA we do, but I'm sure that the results, the real results, are going to be the local questions with the local data, or even with the broad ones. How can we actually understand tropical regions as a whole? Because I know that sometimes we don't talk a lot between tropical regions. It's very hard, like we are like in the entire world, it's so hard to actually access some areas and have like talk to people from Africa, talk to people like from Asia. So, and there are so many problems that actually are very similar, right? And I think that's the point that PANGEA should actually focus on. What are the particularities of each place, but at the same time, what is it that unite us as tropical regions, and that we can answer questions that are actually going to help us to deal with the changes that are coming and are already happening. So I'm really excited, and I'm sure that we are gonna have really great results if PANGEA occurs. If it doesn't, I think this is just the beginning. I think this is just like we are talking now with so many people and make so many connections that are going to be fruitful for sure. So I really hope, like I really believe that PANGEA is going to be success, because I really appreciate and understand that the success, like Michael said about LBA, we just can succeed when we make connections, when we have partners. And this is like true for everything in our lives, actually. And so I believe that training local people and also making connections for people to understand their own places, this is the way that we're gonna get somewhere. So yeah, thank you so much.
This is why it's so important to have so many voices be heard. There's so many important things. I appreciate everything that's been said so far. I would like to open it up to the room, and truly we've heard glowing, amazing, kind of resounding support. Thank you for that. If there are other pieces of feedback on ways we can improve or kind of redirect the ship for the rest of the year in the scoping process, that's welcome too.
No, I think it's really to build on what the precedent, participants say about the practicability of PANGEA. I mean, looking it with the lens of somebody who is navigating in the responses of climate change, I think there is this affirmation that nature can be useful to resolve some global problem like climate change. And then if you want nature or different ecosystem to be able to be part of the solution, you need to have better understanding of those ecosystems. And I think this is one of important points that I think PANGEA will be really able to contribute to the way, tropical forests can be part of the global problems such as climate change. So that is the first point. The second point is really focusing on climate change responses. As we look, the way the responses of climate change are framed, you generally have what we call mitigation of climate change, but also adaptation to climate change. And then when we look the region, the tropical region, they are generally categorized as region where we need to put emphasis on mitigation. And then when you speak to stakeholders of those regions where you have communities that are really vulnerable to climate change, sometimes we say to them that, okay, maybe you can do mitigation as an opportunity, but be aware that adaptation to climate change is a priority to you because you really need to cope with climate change. But with PANGEA, we see that even those carbon stocks may be vulnerable. And then if they are vulnerable, then it means that they need also adaptation plan, those mitigation tools. Then PANGEA will really be useful in strengthening the message that climate change mitigation also need adaptation. I think that is something that we really need to have in mind as you are moving ahead with this program. And then landing, I will say on one of the aspects that was presented on the asymmetry of science knowledge between the global south and then the global north. I think that is something in which PANGEA will be able to really to contribute. But more specifically is the fact that when we see this arena where I will say environmental issues are discussed, the global south want to come there with information. So they came there with the gap of information. But with PANGEA, I think we can be able to provide them with some basic information so that we can strengthen, I would say, the environmental diplomacy to those, strengthen the capacity of those countries to have good knowledge of the ecology and then being able, I will say, to tap on those funding or to, to provide good position in their negotiation. I think those are some of the elements that resonate in my mind, try to, complement what the previous participant are already say. Thank you.
Michael, go first. No, you go first, Michael. Okay. Oh, he's just, okay. Thank you. Ian McCubbin from Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Elsa, wonderful meeting to you and Isaac. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Thank you for all the great leadership. I came here as part of a feasibility team. I'm working on the feasibility side. I've looked at this proposal now for a year, almost exactly, actually a little bit longer. And I think what Ryan and Woody both said was spot on from the NASA headquarters side. Every time I look at this, people say, oh, it's South America, it's Africa, it's complicated. It is complicated, but it's completely doable. I don't see anything, and I've done international deployments with aircraft and ground-based for decades. And I think this is absolutely doable. And I think you need to push forward and not let people say, oh, this isn't possible, because it is possible. And I really am impressed by we talked a lot about biodiversity, but the diversity in the audience and the diversity of the team members. You've got NGOs, you've got government organization, international cooperation. It's just fascinating to see the diversity of people and thoughts and opinions and experiences. And so just keep moving forward. This is going to work out. I think it's just a great opportunity. And the one thing, because you did ask for feedback, I would be cautious of the Asia component. I think you have a very clear story about the pan-tropics with South America and Africa. I'm not saying don't do Asia. I just think you want to be very careful about how you think about that if it's a phase 2 or something like that. There's some complexities going that far and cost and things like that. I'm not saying no, but you did ask for feedback. That's the one thing out of this whole meeting, because you have such groundswell between Africa and South America right now. Just stick with that, I think, and keep going, and then keep the Asia thing in the background. But just because some reviewers thought that it needs to go there, that's adding another level of complexity. And so that's the only caution I have. But the diversity in the audience and the teams, it's just so great. And then the end user applications that you're already thinking about, or user applications and how this can go out, is just fascinating. So thank you very much.
No, thanks, Elsa. It's been fantastic, and I've really enjoyed myself. The discussions and so forth. I have just two very quick points. I'm again Moses Cho from South Africa. I think the very first one is the issue of diversity and inclusion. We should be very deliberate about it. I say this with a lot of experience on the ground, that in Africa, you could quickly find some alpha males hijack the project and exclude many other members of the community. So we should have a very deliberate diversity component, and ensure that different groups, disadvantaged groups, and so forth are represented in the project. That's the first point. Then the second point is the issue of high-end science, it's not something that should be limited to our colleagues in the global north. When I went to South Africa and after a PhD in imaging spectroscopy, I deliberately said I'm going to recruit students who would be involved in modeling, radiative transfer modeling, and cloud computing and so forth. And I'm glad today, if you move to any university in South Africa, you would find one of my students doing imaging spectroscopy and cloud computing, radiative transfer modeling. And these things are feasible if we are deliberate, if we can humble ourselves, ensure that we're recruiting the right persons. And I think that we can succeed and really pushing forward with South-South cooperation, ensuring that colleagues from the global north can come to the global south institutions, spend some time there, work with us in situ in our institutions, instead of this mentality that we have to rather come to the US or to Europe to have some capacity. So I think, yeah, so just 2 points I would like to mention. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Elsa, for giving us opportunity to come here to participate in this important meeting workshop. So, if I see every people here, you have Asian, you have South America, North America, we have African also. So I can say that we are in the same boat, no barrier. It's true that some people want to come, but they didn't have their visa. It's another issue. But no barrier in climate change. You have the same problem. It's true that you have some specific problem in region problem, but in general problem, you have the same problem. Why not to find a global solution for us? So what I want to point out is that I think that PANGEA did not not fall in the same problem like other project, because what you have to do, you have to have in our mind, you have to solve a problem, not science for science. Many projects, they had good result, good papers, but what is sells to people living? What is the result for people living? So I want for PANGEA, what you have to have in mind, yes, you are in science to resolve problems of people. So you have focus to that. You will have many papers about written by scientific, but at the end, what will the result? The result is to improve life of people. So for that, you have to know the needs, and focus on to resolve that problem. So I think that I cross finger. I hope that PANGEA will be funded by NASA. Thank you.
Do we have any comments online? Silent. Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to move us into synthesis. Oh, there's one more person?
Here online.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. If there's somebody online, go ahead. Oh, I see.
I raise my hand.
Yes. Alfonso,
Yes.
please. Yeah, go ahead.
Hello. I want to say something about the technician part because I working in a strike in Panama, and I work with the edicovariant system here, and I has one thought. I think this kind of meeting can help us to place in one place all the people that work with edicovariance in the tropic. So we can put together America, Asia, Africa, so all this part that has to share his problems on the field, how they maintain the keeping working, because one thing that everyone wants to know is in the tropic, maintain the loggers, the anemometers, the IRGA working it's hard. It's hard for the because environment. No? So maybe the PANGEA has one part to put all this information together in one place, and make it can help to improve the place where we have to put some kind of sensor when there is no sensor because nobody see that part, or maybe we need to reach that region of the tropic that is important to cover too. So that's my thought that I want to share about it.
Thank you so much, Alfonso. And we have one final comment from Robinson, and then I'm going to.
Thank you.
wrap us up.
Robinson Neuron Juarez, Berkeley Lab. I was reflecting why we need PANGEA. Came to my mind that I believe this is the first, or will be the first, cross-continental effort to understand how tropical forests respond to climate change and different stressors. That actually is a step forward to understand to know better about the functionality of the Earth system. That is something like NASA really likes. And we know that NASA likes complex things.
Thank you. Yeah, all of these comments and thoughts and feedback are really, really important. And I think what I'm hearing in part is the enthusiasm and the hope and the kind of the recognition that it's possible, it's feasible, we can do this. We need to spend the rest of this year as a leadership team and with our working groups and any of you who are interested in participating in the writing process, working on writing this white paper to actually convince NASA that it is feasible. But I believe we'll get there. I know we can do it. And I think we're already seeing from a lot of these partnering agencies and other possible sources of funding support, there's real interest in this beyond even NASA. Bob, if we can pull back up the slides, I'm going to start moving us forward. So I'm going to be fairly quick about this. I think, you know, we've captured a lot of information that we will report back with you all on in an email, and we'll put together a summary report, and we'll make sure you all know exactly where to go to access all the notes that came out of this. I'm also incredibly hopeful that we've already started to identify some ways to make sure that this community remains a community and continues to grow as a community. I think we're already seeing something come out of the scoping process with PANGEA that's pretty incredible. And so we want to make sure that we keep that momentum going, whether or not this gets funded, frankly. So we're thinking about ways to create a kind of a contact for those of you who are willing to share your information and want to remain engaged. There's a lot of opportunities for potential collaboration. We'll use things like Slack, and we may create, I think we'll probably create a LinkedIn group. I just learned today that you actually can do WhatsApp groups in such a way, or maybe they're not groups, in such a way that's similar to Slack, which is much easier for folks with limited internet access. So we're going to explore that too. But we really are excited about the community involvement that's emerging from this process. I just want to kind of now review, you know, what we set out to do at the beginning of this workshop. I think we've accomplished quite a lot in 2.5 days. So we wanted to make sure you all were aware of what the scoping process actually entails and get your feedback and input. And we have been I'm over the moon, just pleased with the amount of engagement and participation from everyone. I cannot thank you all enough for that. I think we're going to continue to solicit really honest feedback on the design, including the science questions and the geographic scope as I mentioned, we're at this point where we are still gathering information and still in kind of that slightly divergent phase. We'll start to move towards the convergent phase. And I think there's going to be some hard decisions that'll be made, but I'm also hopeful that we'll be able to support kind of the seeding of collaborations that could lead to spin-off activities. And even as we start to narrow what the scope of PANGEA is, there could be a lot of complementary efforts that emerge. And I think we've also identified and discussed a lot of existing efforts that are incredibly aligned with PANGEA. So we're going to continue to pursue additional opportunities and efforts that are ongoing that we should make sure PANGEA is aligned with. So this is also a call to you all to continue to be in touch with the leadership team if things like that come to mind, or if you have contacts who we should be in touch with. Final plug to please put your notes and thoughts into these Google documents. We're going to summarize these and clean these up so that we can share them with you all. There's a huge amount of valuable information here. And now I just want to kind of return us to what we're spending the rest of the year doing. As Ryan reminded us, there's another scoping effort going on. The ARID team is working really hard as well to scope a possible ARID systems campaign. I want you all to know that I'm in touch with Sasha and Andrew, who are co-leading that. We're going to be co-writing a section that would be copied into each white paper that would speak to the potential synergies between those two. There's a lot of possibility for that. And there is a real possibility that NASA, just as much as there's a possibility that NASA will fund one or none of these, there's a possibility they may select components of both to fund. So we're already discussing that, and I think there's opportunities there to think about some of these dry land systems that are adjacent to both ARID and PANGEA that may get missed, that could be included in some sort of wet to dry gradient that would be possible if some aspect of both are funded. So the other thing I want to say about the fact that ARID is a competing proposal is that, as Ryan mentioned, there's some things that are very sellable to NASA within the scope of ARID that we're going to have to do a little bit more work to convince NASA are just as compelling and just as possible on the PANGEA side. And I appreciate Ian's comments and also Woody chiming in with a lot of feedback on how to kind of make sure we hit that home. I'm confident we'll be able to do that. So another reminder as well, thinking about the timeline, we'll move towards the draft white paper being written by September to get that in a shareable format with the rest of the community. And we'll have that out publicly for hopefully a month, at least a month and a half, where we can get comments from folks. And that's a really good time to also be sharing that with people you think are important, can provide a really useful feedback on, is this in a state where USAID would fund some similar component or some other agency or donor organization. And then ultimately we'll get this white paper submitted by November, December. We've already had a lot of interest and involvement in the working groups. This is just some stats from our involvement form. And we're getting a lot of interest and engagement from folks across career stages and from across the tropics and across topical regions of interest. So I would just encourage you all, if you're not already engaged in some capacity or another with one of the working groups, that's going to be the most effective way to provide direct input into what gets put into this white paper. So with that in mind, there is a link here for the website. If you go to our website on the top, there's that Get Involved tab, and there's a few different Get Involved forms you can fill out. The general one, I really want to highlight this middle option, the request for information. So we also recognize that everyone in the community is extremely busy and overworked and undercompensated and under-resourced, especially in parts of the world where we're asking for input and feedback. One thing you can do is, if you don't have time to engage in a working group or in some other capacity, you can still provide input, and we want to hear from you. The request for information form is completely open-ended. And so you can put any of the thoughts that maybe emerged from this workshop, even about what you think PANGEA should be focused on, what it should be aware of, what it shouldn't try to do, things we should be aware of. We want to hear from you. And so that request for information, the RFI form, is really just a space for you to share input with us. And we really, really, really want you to fill that out. Please feel free to share that with as many folks in the community as you can. The last thing I want to just say is kind of ending on emphasizing again, we've heard about this now over the past 2 days, and it was mentioned already this morning. Again, we're in this data rich era of satellite Earth observations with the capacity to kind of map things in ways that we've never been able to map before. But there's a real need to make sure we understand what we're mapping and we're linking that to information on the ground in ways that allow us to effectively and accurately interpret this information, and also make sure it gets into the hands of people who can use this information. With that in mind too, I think the last thing I want to emphasize is I really think the timing is right for PANGEA. We've talked about these different other efforts that are ongoing and the opportunity to think pantropically. There's a lot of things that are happening right now that make this possible in a way that I don't think would have been possible 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And so some of these efforts include things like the One Forest Vision effort from the European side, where there's a real big push to work across tropical continents. There's things like GeoTrees, which has a huge amount of funding to support the calibration and validation of carbon data sets by working with people across the remote sensing community, but importantly with folks who are collecting the data on the ground. And then these different science panels, the science panel for the Amazon has been around for quite a while now, and they're working closely with folks and scientific authorities in the Congo Basin to develop a science panel for the Congo Basin. So this is a really kind of incredible moment, I think, for something like PANGEA to play a role in just supporting a lot of efforts that are already ongoing. So finally, and most importantly, I have a lot of thank yous. I want to thank the amazing team in this room and who helped support us. So Bob Lavoie, Alfonso Villaseñor, Chris online, who's kind of supporting all of the interpretation and translation services, Emily Johnson, Michelle Brown, who's been feeding you all. So let's just pause and thank them for a moment. I want to also thank all of the NASA support that we've had. We've obviously got the funding support, but a lot of really incredible support from program managers who have taken time out of their incredibly busy schedules to be here with us, folks from headquarters who were here. In addition to the NASA support, I really need to emphasize again the incredible funding support we're getting from the U.S. Forest Service, from the Wildlife Conservation Society, as well as from the Governor's Climate and Forest Task Force and UCLA. It's really not possible to pull these off without that kind of funding support. So thanks for that. I really want to thank the PANGEA leadership team and our co-leads for our working groups who have been working tirelessly for a long time now, the better part of, for some of us, better part of over a year, for others, weekly for now months, and they're dedicating a huge amount of effort and energy and time. So thank you to them as well. And then I want to thank, all the people who are participating in the working groups. Even if they couldn't be here today, there's a lot of input that we've gotten from the research community. And I want to thank all of you for participating in either providing lightning talks. We heard some amazing talks about science. So thank you to all the speakers at the lightning talks yesterday. And thank you to those of you who have chaired sessions during this workshop and spoken during sessions. And thank you to all of the participants here and also on Zoom. I just really cannot thank you all enough for the amount of engagement and participation we've had. It's just been, I think the energy from this workshop has been felt by a lot of important people who are going to be making decisions about this. And I'm grateful for that, so that they can just kind of see what I think we all know to be true, which is that there's a real need for this and a real passion for this. And with that, I just want to thank you all so much for being here, and please stay in touch. We appreciate everything you've contributed so far, and we're looking forward to the rest of the year. And the final most important person who I need to thank is Isaac Aguiar.
No, the final most important person we need to thank is Elsa. You may think that she's been doing this his whole life, but this is only the second PANGEA workshop. And it seems like, she's already a fully formed professional PANGEA coordinator. Thank you so much, Elsa.
Thank you. But Isaac, stand up. This is who has made this all possible. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. Okay. And with that, we are adjourned. Please enjoy lunch and stay in touch.